I never believed in the supernatural, ghosts, or creatures like werewolves. I thought they were just myths and legends, stories people told to scare each other. But that was before I had my own encounter with something otherworldly. It happened one night, while I was driving my truck through a remote area of the USA. I was on my way to make a delivery, and I had been driving for hours, with nothing but the sound of the engine and the hum of the tires on the road to keep me company. It was a clear night, with a full moon shining down on the darkened landscape. But then, without warning, my truck began to sputter and cough, and then it just died. I coasted to a stop on the side of the road, and I tried to start the engine again, but it wouldn't turn over. I knew I was in trouble. I was miles from civilization, and I had no way to call for help. As I sat there in the darkness, trying to figure out what to do, I began to hear strange noises coming from the woods around me. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling the leaves, but then I heard something else. Something that sounded like a low growl. I got out of the truck and shone my flashlight into the woods, but I didn't see anything. I thought maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe some kind of wild animal. But the growling got louder, and I could hear other sounds too. Snapping twigs, heavy breathing, and something that sounded like claws scraping against tree bark. Suddenly, I saw movement in the trees. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then I saw them. Two glowing eyes, shining in the darkness. They were too high off the ground to be a deer or a bear. And they were moving closer. I scrambled back into the cab of the truck and locked the doors. I could hear something circling the truck, something big and heavy. I thought about trying to start the engine again, but I knew it was no use. Whatever was out there, it wasn't going to let me leave. That's when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A howl, loud and mournful, echoing through the woods. And then another, and another. It was a pack of them, and they were closing in. I could feel the truck shaking as they began to claw at the doors and windows. I knew I was in serious trouble, but I didn't know what to do. I thought about using my gun, but I didn't want to waste the ammo. And besides, I didn't even know if it would work against something like this. I sat there in the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest, as the werewolves tore at the truck. I knew I was going to die. But then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The growling and howling faded away, and the truck was still. As I crawled out of the wreckage, I realized that I was in the middle of a forest. The sun had set, and the only light was from my headlights. I knew that I needed to get out of there before the werewolves came back. I grabbed my flashlight and started to make my way through the forest, trying to find a road or a path. As I walked, I heard strange noises around me. It was hard to tell if they were just animals or if they were something else. I tried to move quickly, but my injured leg was slowing me down. I could feel blood seeping through my pants and staining my skin. Eventually, I stumbled upon an old cabin. It was in disrepair, with broken windows and a sagging roof, but it was better than nothing. I cautiously pushed open the door and stepped inside. The inside of the cabin was just as run down as the outside. There was a small table and chairs in one corner, and a ratty old couch in another. There was a fireplace on one wall, but it was empty and cold. I tried to block the door with some of the furniture, but I knew it wouldn't hold for long if the werewolves found me. I searched the cabin for anything that could help me defend myself, but there was nothing but a rusty old axe in the corner. As I sat there, waiting for the inevitable, I heard the howls of the werewolves getting closer. I knew that I was running out of time. I picked up the axe and braced myself for what was coming. The door burst open, and I swung the axe with all my might. It connected with something, and I heard a yelp of pain. But there were too many of them, and they quickly overpowered me. I ran into an attic to hide away. I was in there terrified of if I was going to die today. Eventually, the werewolves moved out into the woods. But I stayed there, too afraid to move. And then I heard another sound, the sound of an engine approaching. I looked out the window and saw headlights coming down the road. It was a pickup truck, and it pulled up beside me. The driver got out and walked over to the truck. He was a big man, with a bushy beard and a shotgun slung over his shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. I just nodded, too shocked to speak. He looked at the claw marks on the doors and shook his head. "You were lucky," he said. "They usually don't let anyone get away." I never drove through that area again. Now let's hop onto story number 2. But before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. Me and my friends had been planning this road trip across the United States for months, and we were finally living it. We had driven through mountains, forests, and deserts, and it felt like we had seen it all. That is until we decided to take a shortcut through a small town in the middle of nowhere. The town was completely abandoned, with no signs of life. It was like a ghost town, and we were the only ones there. We thought it was creepy, but also exciting, like we had discovered something no one else had seen before. As we drove through the town, we noticed an old gas station that looked like it had been there for decades. We decided to stop and take some pictures of it, as it looked like it came straight out of a horror movie. That's when we saw the truck. It was an old, rusty truck with no license plates or any identifying marks. It was parked in front of the gas station, and we assumed it belonged to the owner. As we took our pictures, we noticed that the truck was still there, even though we had been there for quite some time. We started to get a little uneasy and decided to leave the town as quickly as possible. As we got back in the car and started driving, we noticed the truck following us. It was like it was stalking us, always a few cars behind, but never letting us out of its sight. We tried to shake it off, taking turns and making quick maneuvers, but the truck was always right behind us. That's when we started to notice something strange. The truck was getting closer and closer, and we could hear the sound of its engine roaring louder and louder. It was like it was angry, like it wanted to hurt us. We were terrified, but we couldn't just stop and let it catch up to us. We had to keep driving, hoping that we could outrun it somehow. But we were wrong. The truck was too fast, too powerful. It rammed into us, sending our car flying off the road and into a ditch. We were all hurt, some of us badly. That's when we saw him. The ghost trucker. He had been killed on this very same road years ago, and now he was back for revenge. He was driving the old, rusty truck, and he was coming straight for us. We tried to run, to get away from him, but he was too fast. He caught up to us, and we could see him through the windshield. His eyes were glowing red, and his face was twisted into a terrifying grin. He crashed into us again and again, each time with more force. We were screaming, crying, begging for mercy, but he wouldn't stop. My heart was racing as I tried to keep up with the car, but the truck was too fast. I looked out the window and saw the ghostly figure of the truck driver in the rearview mirror, his eyes fixed on me. He was getting closer and closer. Suddenly, there was a loud screeching sound as the truck came to a halt. I looked out the window and saw that we were at a dead end. There was a large, rusted gate blocking our path. I turned to my friends and yelled at them to get out of the car. We ran towards the gate, hoping to find a way to escape. But it was no use. The gate was locked. The sound of the truck's engine roared in my ears as it got closer and closer. I turned to my friends and saw the terror in their eyes. We were trapped. Suddenly, there was a loud bang as the truck hit the gate, sending it flying open. The ghostly truck driver emerged from the truck and started walking towards us, his eyes fixed on me. I backed away slowly, trying to think of a way out of this. But the truck driver was getting closer and closer, his ghostly form looming over me. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was one of my friends. "Come on," she said. "We have to go." We ran as fast as we could, trying to put as much distance between us and the ghostly truck driver as possible. But he was relentless, pursuing us through the abandoned town. Finally, we found ourselves at the edge of town. There was a bridge spanning a deep ravine, and we knew that it was our only chance. We ran across the bridge, with the ghostly truck driver hot on our heels. Just as we reached the other side, there was a loud crash as the truck collided with the bridge, sending it tumbling into the ravine below. We looked back and saw the ghostly truck driver's form dissipating into the ether, as if he had finally found peace. As we made our way back to our car, shaken but alive, I couldn't help but think about the ghostly truck driver's tragic fate. He had been chasing us because he was seeking revenge for his own untimely death. But in the end, it seemed like he had found some kind of closure. I never forgot about that night, and whenever I see a truck on the road at night, I can't help but wonder if there's a ghostly driver behind the wheel, seeking revenge for some past wrong. We had survived, but we were forever scarred by that night. The ghost trucker had haunted us, and we knew that he would never stop until he got his revenge. I remember the day I took on that job like it was yesterday. It was a sunny afternoon when I got the call from my dispatcher, asking if I was interested in transporting a special cargo across the country. I was hesitant at first, but the pay was too good to pass up. Little did I know what I was getting myself into. The cargo was a metal container, about the size of a shipping container, with no windows or markings. It looked like it had been through hell and back. The instructions were clear: pick up the container from a remote location in Arizona and deliver it to a research facility in upstate New York. No stops along the way, no detours, and no opening the container under any circumstances. I should have listened to my gut and refused the job. But like a fool, I accepted it and hit the road. The first few days were uneventful. I drove long hours, taking the most desolate and isolated routes to avoid any attention. But then things started to get weird. I began to notice strange noises coming from the container at night. It sounded like scratching and banging, as if something was trying to escape. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the noises grew louder and more persistent every night. I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to pull over and check the container. As I opened the container, I was hit by a foul stench, the smell of decay and rot. I recoiled in horror as I saw what was inside. It was a creature, unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was covered in slimy, mottled skin, with razor-sharp teeth and claws. It had no eyes, just empty sockets that seemed to stare into my soul. And it was hungry. It lunged at me, its jaws snapping, but I managed to slam the container shut and run back to my truck. I drove for hours, trying to put as much distance between me and the creature as possible. But I knew it was too late. Over the next few days, I heard news reports of brutal attacks across the country. People were being torn apart, their flesh ripped off their bones. The descriptions matched the creature I had seen in the container. I knew I had to do something to stop it, but I didn't know how. I tried to plot a coy and trap the creature back into the container. I had unleashed it and I couldn't bear the thought that hundreds might be dead and the blood might be on my hand. After what felt like hours, my plot was in action. I knew I would probably die in my attempt to put the creature back in the container, but at that moment, I knew I had to try. The plan worked as I had planned, and the creature was inside the container once again, and I drove straight to the research facility. Finally, I arrived at the research facility in upstate New York. I pulled up to the loading dock, my heart racing, and told the scientists what had happened. They listened to my story in disbelief, but when they saw the container for themselves, they knew I wasn't lying. They took the container into their lab and began running tests on the creature. They discovered that it was a genetic experiment gone wrong, a creature designed to be the ultimate killing machine. It had escaped from its containment and was now on a rampage, feeding on anything and everything it could find. The scientists worked day and night to find a way to stop the creature. They tried everything from tranquilizers to electrocution, but nothing worked. Finally, they came up with a plan. They would lure the creature into a specially designed chamber and blast it with a powerful laser, disintegrating it into nothingness. I watched as the creature was led into the chamber, its eyes fixed on me, as if it knew I was the one who had brought it into this world. I pressed the button, and the laser fired. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream as it was reduced to ash. I left the research facility that day, a changed man. I couldn't forget what I had seen and done. I was driving down a lonely stretch of highway, my truck humming along beneath me, when I saw her. A woman standing on the side of the road, in the middle of nowhere. I didn't think twice before I pulled over and offered her a ride. She climbed in, her smile small and secretive. I tried to make conversation, but she didn't seem interested. She just stared out the window, her eyes fixed on the dark landscape rushing by. As we drove on, I began to notice strange things about her. Her skin was too smooth, almost plastic-like, and she didn't seem to blink. Her movements were too precise, too measured, as if she were following a script. I tried to shake off my unease and focus on the road ahead, but the hairs on the back of my neck wouldn't stop prickling. Something was off about this woman, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Then, as we approached a small town, she turned to me and spoke for the first time since getting in the truck. "Could you take me to the forest, please?" she asked, her voice soft and insistent. I hesitated. It was late, and I had a long way to go. But something in her tone made me agree, against my better judgment. As we drove deeper into the forest, the road grew rougher, the trees taller and darker. The woman beside me grew more and more still, her eyes fixed ahead, unblinking. Suddenly, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should stop the truck, pull over and let me out," she said, her tone icy and unsettling. My hands tightened on the wheel. "Why? Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I need to get out," she repeated, her eyes fixed on mine. "Please. Now." The urgency in her voice sent a chill down my spine, and I quickly scanned the road ahead for a place to pull over. Finally, I spotted a small clearing by the side of the road and pulled over, the engine idling as I turned to face her. But as I looked at her, I realized that something was very, very wrong. Her eyes had changed, shifting from glowing pupils to a solid, inhuman yellow, and her skin seemed to be peeling away, revealing something dark and twisted beneath. She climbed out of the truck, and for a moment I thought she was going to disappear into the darkness. But then she turned and looked back at me, her eyes glowing a sickly green. And then I saw it. Her skin was peeling away, revealing scales and claws and something that was definitely not human. "You can't leave yet," she hissed, her eyes burning into mine. "I need you." I tried to run, but it was too late. She was on me in an instant, her teeth sinking into my flesh, her claws tearing me apart. I don't know how long I lay there, bleeding and broken. But when I finally opened my eyes, she was gone, and I was alone in the dark forest. I stumbled to my feet and made my way back to my truck, my body screaming with pain. As I drove away, I knew that I would never be the same again. That woman, that thing, had changed me forever. And I knew that I would never be able to forget her. I've been driving trucks for over a decade now, and I've seen some weird stuff on the road. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened last night. I was driving through a remote area in the middle of nowhere when the rain started coming down hard. The wind was howling, and I could barely see the road in front of me. That's when I saw them, 4 figures standing by the side of the road, all huddled together and drenched to the bone. I pulled over and rolled down my window to see if they needed a ride. "Thank you so much," one of them said, a young woman with long, curly hair. "We've been stuck here for hours." "Get in," I said, and they climbed aboard. There were 3 women and 1 man, all dressed in dark robes that looked like they were soaked through. They were all shivering and seemed grateful for the warmth of the truck. "Where are you folks headed?" I asked. "Just a few miles up the road," the man said. "We're on our way to our coven's next ritual." I raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. I've seen all kinds of strange passengers in my truck, so this didn't really faze me. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about these people. They were all whispering to each other and glancing in my direction. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it made me uneasy. We finally arrived at their destination, a secluded house in the middle of the woods. They all got out and thanked me before disappearing inside. I was about to pull away when I heard a loud scream coming from the house. It was quickly followed by another, and then another. I couldn't just leave, so I got out and cautiously approached the house. As I got closer, I could hear chanting coming from inside. It was in a language I didn't understand, but it was clear that something was happening in there. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. The 4 passengers were standing in a circle, holding hands and chanting. In the center of the circle was a naked woman, writhing in agony. Her body was covered in cuts and bruises, and blood was streaming down her legs. I realized with horror that this was their ritual sacrifice. One of the women turned to me and smiled. "You're just in time," she said. "We need one more for the sacrifice." I didn't stick around to find out what that meant. I turned and ran out of the house as fast as I could. I got back in my truck and sped away, my heart racing and my mind reeling. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest police station. When I told them what had happened, they didn't believe me at first. But when they sent a team to investigate, they found the house exactly as I had described it. They arrested the 4 passengers, and I later learned that they were all members of a local coven that had been under investigation for years. I still have nightmares about that night, and I'll never forget the feeling of being trapped in a house with a group of witches performing a ritual sacrifice. It's something that will haunt me for the rest of my life.